A long time ago, in a world not too different from our own, the sun vanished. The world descended into chaos and calamity as nations fell, cities crumbled, and people were plunged into an endless night. Centuries later, in the year 2745, there lived a young girl named Lyra. Lyra lived deep within the caverns beneath what was once New York City. She made her home amongst the glowing ruins of the Great Collapse, surviving off the bioluminescent plants that grew in the perpetual darkness. But Lyra was no ordinary girl. She possessed a mysterious orb of light that had been passed down from her ancestors, a relic from a time when the sun still shone in the sky. The orb was small enough to fit in the palm of her hand, yet it seemed to contain an infinite amount of light and warmth. Its glow illuminated the darkness around her, casting dancing shadows on the crumbling walls and making the bioluminescent plants bloom with vibrant colors. It was the only source of light for miles around, and its power seemed to be tied to her emotions. When she was happy, its glow was bright and cheerful. When she was sad, it grew dim and mournful. And when she was scared, it flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows that writhed and twisted like living things. One day, while exploring the ruins above ground, Lyra stumbled upon a strange structure that looked like a giant eye staring up at the darkness. She had never seen anything like it before and couldn't understand its purpose. Suddenly, the orb in her hand began to react violently, pulsing with an intense white light that seemed to pierce the darkness itself. Drawn by some unseen force, Lyra reached out and touched the orb to the cold metal surface. As she did, a jolt of energy surged through her body, and the orb began to glow with a brilliant golden light. Startled by the sudden brightness, Lyra pulled away, but it was too late. The light was already spreading, pushing back the darkness and revealing a world that had been hidden for centuries. As the light spread, ancient mechanisms began to stir, gears grinding and pistons pumping, all driven by the rekindled flames. With trembling hands, Lyra touched the orb again, and this time it responded with a soft, gentle light. She realized then that the orb was reacting to her emotions, growing brighter with joy and love, and dimming with sadness and fear. But what was this place? And how could she control the power of the orb? Her search for answers led her to an ancient archive where she discovered the truth about her world and her destiny. She learned that the sun hadn't simply vanished. It had been extinguished by a cataclysmic event known as the Great Collapse. The nations of the old world had waged war until every city was in ruins and the sky was filled with fire. In a last-ditch effort to end the conflict, a group of scientists had attempted to create a device that could bring peace to the warring nations. But the machine malfunctioned, creating a massive black hole that consumed everything around it, including the sun. Lyra also learned that her ancestors had survived the initial blast, and had carried the orb with them as they fled to the underground. They had kept the orb hidden for generations, passing it down to Lyra in the hopes that one day she would be able to reignite the sun and bring balance back to the world. But how? As Lyra pondered the problem, she noticed something strange. The darkness wasn't just empty blackness. If she looked closely, she could see faint glimmers of light, sparks of the sun's energy trapped within the black hole. The key to reigniting the sun, she realized, was to gather these scattered embers and fan them into flames. But how could she reach them? The answer, she knew, lay within the orb itself. Taking the orb in her hands, Lyra closed her eyes and embraced her emotions, allowing them to flow through her. As she let go of her fear and sadness, a brilliant golden light erupted from the orb, driving back the darkness and revealing a shimmering portal. Without hesitation, Lyra stepped through. On the other side, Lyra found herself in a vast cavern filled with the scattered embers of the sun. Each ember was like a tiny star, burning with a fierce white light that illuminated the cavern in shades of gold and crimson. But the beauty of the sight was deceptive. The embers were surrounded by a thick black fog that seemed to devour all light and heat. It was clear that if she wanted to reignite the sun, she would have to face the darkness head-on. But how could she possibly defeat such an overwhelming force? As Lyra stood there contemplating the task ahead, one of the embers suddenly flared, sending a surge of energy through the cavern. The light was unlike any she had seen before, radiating a powerful warmth that seemed to push back the darkness. Hope surged through Lyra. Perhaps the answer didn't lie in brute force, but in understanding and embracing her emotions. Closing her eyes, Lyra focused on the feeling that the light had evoked in her, the sense of warmth and comfort that came from being surrounded by the light. As she opened her eyes, the cavern around her began to change. The walls shimmered with new colors, and the scattered embers grew brighter, their light combining to form a single brilliant flame. It was a beautiful sight to behold, but it was also dangerous. The flames crackled and roared, threatening to consume everything in their path. But Lyra wasn't afraid. She had learned that the orb's power was tied to her emotions, and she knew that if she could embrace the fear and uncertainty, she could control the flames. Taking a deep breath, Lyra stepped forward, allowing the flames to surround her. The heat was intense, but it was also exhilarating. She felt a sense of power and freedom that she had never experienced before. And as she danced in the flames, the orb in her hand pulsed with a brilliant golden light, guiding and protecting her. Suddenly, the flames began to recede, forming a swirling vortex of light and energy. At its center, the embers of the sun burned brightly, their light growing stronger with each passing moment. With a final surge of power, the flames erupted, bursting forth from the cavern and into the sky. As the light of the sun returned to the world, the sky blazed with color, and the darkness that had shrouded the world for so many years was finally lifted. The people who had been trapped in eternal night emerged, blinking into the sunlight, their faces filled with wonder and awe. The sun was back in the sky, and the world was bathed in its warm glow. Plants that had withered for centuries sprouted new leaves, and animals that had gone extinct reappeared, drawn back to the light. And as the world rejoiced in the return of the sun, Lyra knew that her journey had come full circle. She had embraced her emotions, faced her fears, and restored balance to the world. As the light of the sun fell upon her face, Lyra smiled, knowing that she had brought light back to the world. The orb in her hand pulsed warmly, its light fading to a gentle glow as it sensed her contentment. Looking up at the brilliant blue sky, Lyra knew that her adventure had just begun. The world was healing, and she was a part of that healing. With the sun shining brightly overhead, the future stretched before her, full of possibilities.